Surrey and Brampton are regular towns. They've essentially been overtaken, I wouldn't say taken over, overtaken by immigrants from Punjab. Canada needs labor, Canada needs more people because it is caste. Caste is still there. You contend with it every day
Yes.
in this country. We contend with it every day in the diaspora. And it's evil. We're not courageous enough. You know, we talk big talk, hamara ye hai, hamara wo hai. Lekin if you look, dig deep down, we have so many problems as a country. And India is, they all talk about software programmers, technology, money, you know, and bombs and airplanes and how many weapons we have. But there's a lot more that needs to be changed in India. Show me a country that's perfect. I mean, Canada is more perfect than it was when I got there in 1968, but it is still a work in progress. All countries are a work in progress. For me, I have always been an activist first.
Hello everyone on Just Talking. This is Jaskiran Kapoor and I am with Ujjal Dosanjh, who's all the way here from Canada with his lovely wife at the Kasoli Lit Fest. And it's a pleasure meeting him. So he's written two books till now, his autobiography. So Canadian politician, Canadian lawyer, former Minister of Health, and I'm still actively involved in the Canadian political life, I believe.
Uh, Actively involved in terms of writing and speaking, perhaps.
Yes, and you have spoken strongly against violence.
I've always done that,
Always.
yeah.
So, because we'll start with one thing when we'll get it out of the way is the relationship right now, which is at such a fragile, I will call it fragile, between Canada and India, especially when Punjab is involved. Because as Punjab da बहुत पुराना रिश्ता है with Canada, and somewhere I also want to know कि what is this fascination of Punjabis with Canada? Uh, I see even now everyone wants to go there.
Well, I mean, you know, let me tackle it from the beginning. I think that for me personally, these are the two most important countries on earth. I was born and raised in India, so that makes me an Indian by heritage. And I'm a Canadian citizen. I've spent the better part of 40, 50 years in Canada. So that makes me a Canadian. And so I'm concerned about the relationship that you mentioned. In terms of the fascination with Canada, I think it began as an economic thing. I mean, people went because of the economy, because of opportunities. And that has been thus all the while. And many of the students that are going aren't really students, they're actually immigrants in the garb of students for 3 years and then try and get a permanent residence. So let's not kind of kid ourselves. Maybe 10% of the students are real students, the 90% are in the immigrant category. Ultimately, that's what they want. So it is still the economic thing that's pushing Punjabis out. Economic opportunities, there's almost scarcity of land, of resources, as is the case with the rest of India, the booming population. So people look for opportunities, and I think that that's the case. And secondly, you go where your ancestors have gone, where your families have gone, right? And then you go into that country, and some people used to say, well, why do you all gather up in Surrey? Well, you go into a strange place, you go where people who speak like you, write like you, eat like
Find your tribe.
you, you go there, right? So it's natural.
So this belt, Surrey and Toronto, and I think
Surrey, Brampton,
Brampton.
yeah.
This is very very prominent Punjabi belt. We even have some places named after the Punjab villages also. Paldi is one, I believe.
No, but Paldi is an old historic city, town. There used to be a mill owned by people from Paldi, Meos, and they put together a settlement for workers and others to work in the mill, and that became Paldi. There's still a temple there.
There's still
But Surrey and Brampton are regular towns. They've essentially been overtaken, I wouldn't say taken over, overtaken by immigrants from Punjab, yeah.
So, how important is the Punjabi today in Canada? Because I believe they also contribute a lot economically, but because of this little friction, those all those who send their kids there for studying, they're a little jittery. Ki banega, ki hoega, because of all these news. Kenny ji, we want a separate land, and the Khalistan movement. Is it there or is it just a bubble? Is it just a cloud? What is the actual picture sitting here? We are just absorbing what we are being told.
Well, first of all, let me deal with the question of students. I don't think Canada is going to take any negative steps to harm the students or prevent the entry of the students coming into Canada. It makes money for Canada. Canada needs labor. Canada needs more people. Canada. This is I think last year was the first year in several decades that Canada's population actually went up
All right.
without immigration. I mean, with immigration, it went up, I think, by a huge margin. So I think that that's not going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I know that Indian government has reacted more aggressively and have sent away 41 diplomats, Canadian diplomats. I mean, India is a free country. They can do what they want. I mean, if I were the Prime Minister of India, I wouldn't have done that. Because if you're a big country, you're a great country, you're a happening place, you show some grace.
What would have been your stance or your
Not
approach?
not to send away 41 diplomats. My stance would be Canada is a democracy. Canada is a friendly country. No two democracy in the history of the world had ever fought a war. You show me a single instance. So it's always in your interest to work together. On top of that, India is now victimizing people of its own heritage who want to come back. These are the visiting months of a year.
Yes.
October to March is the time when people from all over the world, the Western world, come to India. And Canadians who don't have the OCI can't come. So I think India should be a little more generous, at least to people who want to come and visit and resume the issuance of visas. In terms of India's attitude generally, I'd be upset too if I was India as a country being named in the assassination of a person across international borders, because it's not the done thing. If India has done it, it's wrong. The Prime Minister of Canada may have mishandled it to a certain extent, but he wanted to get ahead of a newspaper report which was coming out. There were other avenues of dealing with it. But once it was out, I understand India needed to react. It reacted. But I think, expelling 41 additional diplomats is just escalating it. And from my perspective, both as an Indian by heritage and as a Canadian, when you're a great country, when you're a big country, your economy is moving, you're doing big things on the world stage. You could be a little more generous to a fellow democracy and say, okay, you made a mistake, let's deal with it.
All right. And being a Canadian and being an Indian at heart also, are you torn between these two identities sometimes?
No, I'm not. I can navigate them pretty easily, as I'm doing right now.
So growing up, you went from Jalandhar, right?
I went from
At the age of 17.
Dosanjh Kala. Yeah.
Dosanjh Kala, and you were 17 when you
I
went?
was 18. My father had lied on the school certificate.
All right. So how was it when the first time you landed in Canada? What was the year?
I went to England in 1964.
Okay,
That's
first
where-
it was
Yeah,
England.
yeah,
Okay.
England. And I went to Bedford. That's where I lived for 3.5 years.
Okay.
And I worked in Derby and in London a little bit, but much of the time I spent in Bedford. That's where that novel, the Past is
Past
Never
is
Dead, is set.
Okay.
It's the story of an untouchable child who is taken by his father to Britain, to Bedford, and how caste follows him.
All right.
And so I
Was
was
the
there.
story inspired or is it?
The story is about, some of the events are true, others are imagined. They happen to some of my friends in Bedford,
But why write about it
I-
now?
because it is caste. Caste is still there. You contend with it every day
Yes.
in this country. We contend with it every day in the diaspora. And it's evil. And it should stop. And we don't, because we Indians have learned to live with these kinds of discriminations from centuries. We're not courageous enough. We talk big talk, hamara ye hai, hamara wo hai. Lekin if you dig deep down, we have so many problems as a country in terms of lack of equality, We are the most color conscious people on earth. We, I mean we. I mean, I'm including myself as well as Indians. We're the most color conscious people on earth. We are steeped in the prejudices of caste and regionalism and ethnicities and linguistic chauvinism. You name it, we have it. That doesn't mean India is not worth living. It is a great place. Thousands of years of history, wonderful history. But you can't live on the past. You can't eat the past. You gotta look to the future. And India isn't doing it. I'm afraid they all talk about software programmers, technology, money, and bombs and airplanes and how many weapons we have. But there's a lot more that needs to be changed in India, and nobody's paying attention to that.
Were you ever discriminated against, or did you discriminate? Were you ever discriminated against, or did you discriminate as
In terms of racial discrimination,
in terms of any kind of discrimination?
well, I mean that there were
Economic, racial,
no,
caste,
there were
color,
there were
creed.
there were instances of of discrimination. I found, like I had a run-in with the skinheads in England, and I had a run-in with a couple of people in Canada, but show me a country that's perfect. I mean, Canada is more perfect than it was when I got there in 1968, but it is still a work in progress. All countries are a work in progress.
Why move from England to Canada? Was it a decision by the family, or?
No, I going from India to England was my own decision, for which I had to persuade my father to let me go.
Why? Well, you at that.
I wanted to. I wasn't studying very much. My life was going to go into different places, and I got admission in a college in London behind my father's back, and then I had to persuade him to let me go. And he did let me go. I was a pretend student. I had no money. So I worked in many jobs, like a crayon maker, train shunter, car parts factory worker. I mean, I did all sorts of work as a lab assistant in a secondary school. And then I wanted to actually get admission in university. I had done some O levels, learned English listening to BBC, and then when I tried getting admission, I wasn't getting admission, and I couldn't. They said, learn history, as I said in my speech, learn history, British history, and we'll give you a place. And I couldn't tell one King George from another.
So many of them.
So
It's very
so
confusing.
I was depressed, and that's when I started thinking about Canada, and here I am. I went into the Canadian Immigration Office, and they kind of lapped me up and said, "Okay, you're going to Canada."
But you were never interested in studies, and you now deep into it. Law.
Never interested in
As
studies.
in, at that time, you said that I was not in England, not interested.
No, I was. I couldn't get admission.
You couldn't get admission.
Oh yeah, no, I was always interested in studying.
Always, and law was.
I did several O levels going to evening classes
Okay.
in England. I was always interested in studies. I didn't have the money to be a full-time student,
Okay.
so I was a pretend student going into Britain.
But that's interesting. And then politically, were you interested because this is something that came through the legal career that, okay, I'm fighting for the good, let's just get into this and be part of the parliament?
No, never. See, look, most people think politics is a career or a profession. For me, politics is not about being an MLA or an MP or a minister. For me, I have always been an activist first. And I inherited that from my nana who went to British jails for 8 years. Nobody paid him anything. Nobody gave him a position, but he spent he got into the independence movement in 1913 or 14. When was the Nankana Sahib Saka? I can't remember the year. He was in Shanghai. His brother was in BC. His older brother sent him a letter, say, come and join me in Canada. He said, look, I'll go visit our mother, and then I'll get a passport and I'll come to Canada. He went, got involved in the Nankana Sahib Saka, and then from there, Babbar Akali Lehar and Kirti Kisan Party, Communist Party of India. He spent 8 years in British jails. and then went to jail in independent India as a communist worker. And then he went to Canada in 75 and died there in 82. And I grew up with him. The first 4 years of my education was with my nana at his village. And my father was an activist, and he had set up the school where I matriculated from. And so politics was all around. But for me, and for my father, in fact, it was the same. Politics wasn't about being elected. Post independence, politics in India has come to be known as getting elected is politics.
Yes.
People ask me, when did you get into politics? I can't remember the time when I wasn't in politics because I was a social activist.
Part of some movement.
I was an activist. I want to change the world for the better, right? When I ran, I didn't run. People actually from the Riding Association came and looked for me and said, look, we like you, we watch you on TV, listen to you on radio. Why don't you run for us? Right? So I did.
Is the activist in you still alive? Are you still
Oh,
actively
absolutely.
involved in a lot of?
No, I'm involved in speaking out and in writing.
Okay, so
My novels are,
different from what you were doing otherwise.
but my novels are all about politics so far.
Next three, what are they going to be?
Next three, the next one in line is about what happened to this country between 1975 and now.
Which country?
This country.
India.
Yes,
All right.
Yes.
That's going to be interesting. Did
And there's another one that's sitting with my publisher. That is the story of 3 or 4 young men who were part of the independence movement, starting from the early 1900s when they were born, through partition, until the end of the emergency in 1977, and what happened to them, and the disappointments. All the freedom fighters weren't pleased about what was happening to the country.
Yes, they'll have different.
So I don't think nobody's ever written a novel about freedom fighters being disappointed at the end in the 70s or
Again,
60s.
inspired? Do you have such stories in your life inspired from them?
Oh, I have my grandfather's story, my father's story,
And
but the book isn't about them. It's all fictionalized, but that was in my head. I wanted to write that way back in the 80s.
there's a lot of research. You must have traveled back again to India for a lot of other. No, this is all imagination.
It's fiction. As long as you get the historical records right, it's all
Yes.
fiction.
But fiction is also inspired.
Well, you have
from
to know the
fact.
country.
Yes, you have to know the country.
Well, I was 18 when I left. It's in my blood. It's in my veins. It's in my head.
And it calls you back again and
Oh,
again.
yeah. Well,
Next, let's.
once an Indian, always an Indian.
Yes, on that note, I'll take your leave here.
Thank you.
And hope to see you again. And we are looking forward to the next 3 books.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ujjal ji. Lovely meeting you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.